Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on navigating transitions and change. If you haven't already, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as we get started here. You're welcome to share where you're joining us from, or a word or a phrase about how you're feeling, or anything else you'd like us to know today. My name is Molly Buss, and I am the Community Relations Manager at the Early Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. And my role for today's webinar is to moderate the chat. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick introduction of the Bakken Center for those that may not be familiar with our work. It is our vision to advance the health and well-being of individuals, organizations, and communities through integrative health and healing. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have strived to provide free resources and webinars to help you navigate these challenging times. And we need your help to continue to do this work. So if you are able to, please consider making a donation of any amount, and more information about how to make a donation will be provided in the post-webinar email. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Mary Jo Kreitzer, founder and director of the Early Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. And Mary Jo will be facilitating the Q&A segment, and will also share a bit more information about our presenter today. But before I turn things over to Mary Jo, I just wanted to cover a few logistical items to help you navigate the webinar functions. So you're welcome to share your thoughts and comments via the chat box. And if you are comfortable and want to share your responses with all participants, please make sure to update the to field in the chat box to all panelists and attendees. And then just note that you have the opportunity to minimize the chat box during the presentation. And we do invite for you to do that during the components that aren't interactive to help you stay present. And then also note that there's a Q&A icon where you can submit your questions, and Mary Jo will ask our presenter, Theresa, as many of your questions as we have time for at the end of this session. If you aren't able to find those icons, hover your mouse over the bottom of the webinar screen and they should pop up for you. We will be sending out an email that will include a recording of the webinar as well as other resources later today, so watch out for that. Without further ado, I'll now turn things over to Mary Jo.
Well, thank you very much, Molly, and thank all of you for joining us in the webinar today. Throughout our lives, we will face both welcome and unanticipated changes that will disrupt our sense of normalcy, and sometimes will change the whole trajectory of our lives. Even wanted changes, such as new jobs and relationships, force us to navigate transition. We have a change and transition expert with us today, one of our faculty members from the Bakken Center, Theresa Nutt. Theresa is the co-director of the Integrative Health and Wellbeing Coaching Program at the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. She holds a bachelor's degree in nursing and a master's in human and organizational development with a focus in corporate coaching and training. Theresa is also a board certified holistic nurse and is certified in wellness and health and wellness coaching. For the past 25 years, she has worked in various nursing roles, and for 18 of those years has been engaged in coaching roles. Please join me in welcoming Theresa. And Theresa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mary Jo. Such a pleasure to be here with everyone today. And so I want to just start with something that I think we don't always take enough time to, and that is to just breathe and get really present. So I'm going to invite each of you to find a comfortable position and just get your feet on the ground. Let your body relax. And we're just going to take a couple of nice, slow, deep breaths, bringing all of our attention right here, right now. So in your own time. And when you feel ready, just slowly bring your attention back to the presentation. And hopefully that kind of breathing and mindfulness is something you could just make space for in your day. So there are 3 objectives for our short time together today. And the first is I want to give some definition to these terms we hear about, transition and change, and really help you understand the differences. And then look at, there are from several theories, there are different theories around transition, but the father of them is William Bridges. And he has identified 3 stages of transition. And of course, with my coaching background, he's also given us the tools and techniques that help navigate each of those stages. And so I want to spend some time not just giving you theory, but also practices, because obviously here we are in a time where COVID is ever present, though we are much further than we were when it started. We have systemic racial issues and the election coming up. And so there's just a lot of change and transition that is really present and really visible to us. And so having good tools, having good information feels like a really timely topic. So hopefully this is helpful.
Theresa, sorry to interrupt you. We're getting a little bit of static with your audio. I'm wondering if you switch back to that other mic, if that would be better.
Thanks for letting me know. Is that any better, or do I still need to?
That is much better. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Molly. I appreciate you telling me. Certainly don't want to be causing static on the line. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. So let's start with the definition. And Mary Jo sort of laid the groundwork beautifully, but change is something that happens to people, even if you don't agree with it. So some of the changes that come into our life are unwelcome, and some are welcome. But transition, on the other hand, it's our internal process, and it's what happens to our mind as we go through the change. And so that's what we're going to spend our time talking about, because the change is usually not something we have a lot of control over. But our transition process, that's where we have personal empowerment, and we can make choices that really help support us. So just to give another definition again, it's the inner psychological process, and it's about, I feel like his language, Dr. Bridges' language, is so important. It's about how you internalize and come to terms with the new situation that a change brings into your life. And that's really what we want to work on today. So this is the graphic that he uses to describe the 3 different phases of change. And the very first, which none of us particularly love, is ending. So any change brings with it endings. And then from the endings, we move into the neutral zone, where we sort of leave behind what we've always known, and yet the new has not yet appeared. And eventually we move into the new beginnings. And so again, there are activities and practices you can use at each step that will help this movement from endings through the neutral zone into the new beginnings be easier. And I want to offer a couple of metaphors that I've heard from other teachers about transition. Dr. Jean Davidson talks about this idea of being on a ship. When you first leave dock, you can still see land, and that's what endings are about. You're leaving something, but you can still see what was. And the farther out you go to sea, eventually you can't see land on either side. That's when you kind of hit that neutral zone where you have left behind the familiar and nothing new has arrived yet. And then new beginnings is when you start to move forward and you start to see new land. And so if that metaphor is helpful as we talk through this, I thought it was a very interesting way to take a look at this. So I'm going to start with that one. The other she uses is that the neutral zone is like a hallway. And so some hallways are longer than others. Some are easier to see down. So depending on the change and how big of an impact it has on your life, sort of depends how long and how challenging that neutral zone can be for a person. So those 2 metaphors might help as we start to work through the specifics.
Hey, Theresa, we're still getting some static here. So
okay.
Maybe just double checking that you are indeed using the computer microphone. Another option might be to back up a little bit if you're able to.
Okay, let me try to. Okay, Let me try this again. Molly, is my sound better?
It appears to be better. Yeah, let's give
Okay,
that a try.
let's hope for it. Thank you. Okay. Again, my apologies for the sound quality today. So here are the steps of endings, or rather, when I say the steps of endings, these are the things you want to pay attention to when you're in that phase of endings. And it's generally right after a change has occurred. And the first is to identify what you are losing and mark it in some way. And often, this is not something that we take the time to do. We sort of keep on going, put our head down, keep moving. And it can be really important to do something to make note of it. The other is to determine your feelings. Again, this can be really hard to do, but it's so important to just stop and say, what am I feeling about this? How is this affecting me? Where am I noticing it in my body? All of that, because one of the things that really impacts stress is not slowing down enough to notice our feelings. And then what we often do, if we don't stop and notice our feelings, is stuff them. We shove them down with food or alcohol or other things to try and numb them out, when in fact, actually just becoming familiar with them can be very healing. And it can feel frightening. It can feel like your feelings will overwhelm you and consume you and capsize you. But that's just generally not the case if we're really used to being in relationship with that ability to slow down and sit with feelings. And we'll talk more about that, but I just want to point that out. Then this feels to me like the most important work. The next step is to choose what you want to leave behind and what you can carry forward, because endings are not about just clearing the deck. Sometimes they are, but very rarely. Usually what we can do is decide, what is it about how I've been living my life that I want to carry forward? And are there things about it that maybe haven't been as effective as I had thought? And I can imagine, I've never been a parent, but I have several siblings who are. When you go from not being a parent to being a parent, there are some different ways you have to behave moving forward, and it changes your focus and your habits and your beliefs and behaviors. So applying that to many different ways of managing transition is important. And in the same vein, but a slightly different way of looking at it, is also to celebrate what was good about your old life. So you're not just saying it wasn't important at all, I wish I'd never had it, rejecting it, throwing away, but really celebrating and then also making room for the new to emerge. So those are some key steps when you're working with endings. So I want to just pause here and ask you to offer a little thought to this and maybe write your answer in the chat. Mary Jo is going to help me with this. So what do you struggle with most when you are letting go after a change has occurred?
So, Theresa, some of the answers are feel of loss of control, lack of routine, saying goodbye, the baggage, anxiety, the feeling of ease, leaving the past behind and moving forward, no control. Lots of people comment on no control. Making mistakes with new routines, fear of making mistakes, grief, staying in touch with my emotions, letting go of my old life, longing memories. And the last one I'll mention is confidence going forward.
Oh, thanks, Mary Jo. Those are such great responses, everyone. I really appreciate it, because I think, isn't that why it's so hard to let go? Because we knew how to operate in the old way, and we felt confident, and we could count on certain things. So that feeling of lack of control and some of the other grief and emotions you mentioned, so powerful. Thanks for weighing in. I really appreciate it. So this is just a final parting thought in this place of the letting go. Transition does not require that you reject or deny the importance of your old life, but that you let go of it. So we will let go of this part of the presentation and move on to the neutral zone, which really, this is the place where there's the most work to do, for lack of a better word, where we really it is this place where we have so much uncertainty, and certainly we've experienced it this year with the changes that have been present, because the old has faded, but a new normal hasn't formed yet. And so we don't really know what we're moving toward. And what all of the theories found is that people really lose their sense of identity in this place. It's kind of like, well, I knew who I was. I don't know who I need to be yet. And here I sit somewhere in the middle. And so our work in the place of the neutral zone is really about managing our stress and discomfort, our emotions, and our uncertainty. Not wanting to push any of it away, not making ourselves wrong for having these very normal human reactions to the process, but to really be able to hold all of that. And at the same time, then, as a result, we have to become curious about and relearn things like our roles, our responsibilities, and our sense of identity. And one of the ways Dr. Jean Davidson talks about using this place in the neutral zone is to find the gifts and lessons in the process. And I really think her work around that is so important. I attended a presentation in July that she did, and she was talking about the COVID change because it was so present to her. And she said the number of gifts, so she has relearned things like how to make a certain kind of soup from scratch. And she is doing better with her water consumption because she's working from home and she can track it better. So taking the time to say, yes, there are a lot of things that are not the way I want them, but there are some things that are different than they were. And actually they're supporting me and my well-being. And so I invite you to look at life in the very same way and see if you can find some gifts and lessons that are helpful, even when it feels so uncertain.
Hey, Theresa, we're getting a little bit of that static again. I'm not positive. I think it seems to be when you lean a little bit more forward that's when the static starts. So sorry to ask you, maybe try sitting back.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Molly. Okay. So here's another visual that I thought might be helpful when we look at this process of moving through the neutral zone. And if you start in the top left, when a change comes to us, we start with shock and denial and kind of being overwhelmed by the situation. And a lot of people, again, this is very normal when we think about emotions, move through this phase of a very strong emotional response where we might have more anger, where we might have more blame or frustration or sort of quote lashing out. And we might even bargain. It can really be like, if I just do this, can we go back? It's a very normal part of the grief process. And it kind of comes up when we deal with the change cycle. So some of this might look familiar if you are familiar with the grief process. But then I see where the bottom lies, and we've had students coaching clients, and I have been coaching clients, and this apathy phase is a really important part of the change cycle, but it can feel terrifying because all of a sudden, we don't have the energy for things that we used to, and we're sort of sitting back and not being as engaged as we were. And so I think it's important to note that apathy is actually a normal part of this process. So some of you may have noticed that you got to a place where there were really strong emotions, and then all of a sudden, there was sort of this feeling of moving into apathy or not really having a lot of feeling about any of it. And the good news about it, if we can stay there long enough and feel it, is that we move into acceptance from that place. So it is sort of the last step on the way down as we start to move into acceptance. And from this place of acceptance, sort of the place where I can't go back to the past anymore. I have to move forward, even if I'm not super excited about it. If we can get to that place, then we move into curiosity, or they call it exploration. And you start to be curious about this new thing that's coming your way and see what possibilities lie there for you. And from that place, then really when you start to move into new beginnings, then you have an understanding, you're ready to integrate and sustain. So that's for a little later, but I just wanted to share this model because I feel like it's a really good other way to look at this process we move through and hopefully normalize some of the feelings that can be really overwhelming as we move through it. So as with the other step, there are steps you can take in the neutral zone to help you navigate it with more ease. And the first is thinking about what you treasure about this time. What has this change allowed for you that normal times wouldn't? And I gave some examples previously, but really sit and ask yourself that question. I know for some of our students, they've mentioned that they have time with their family that previously they maybe would not have had in the same way. So perhaps each of you can sit and just reflect on a single treasure about a change you've been through. It also gives you an opportunity, this is perhaps the biggest opportunity in the neutral zone, is to really sit with your beliefs, your relationships, your habits, and your expectations. Because we often do these things quite automatically, and they're not always serving us super well. So it can be helpful to sort of sit back and be curious and say to ourselves, is this a belief I want to continue to hold? Or would it be helpful for me to consider a new belief or a new relationship, or perhaps reconfigure relationships? So it's a chance to really look at that, and habits and expectations. One of the things I want to say about expectations that I've noticed, and it's confirmed in the theory and research, is that when you have super high expectations, it's like this change came, I'm just going to soldier through, I'm going to get it right, I'm not going to make any mistakes, or else I'm doing something wrong. It can become an unnecessary burden for the person going through such a big transition. So this is where I really believe that sitting with emotions, practicing self-compassion and mindfulness is critical. So I wanted to take a minute and just walk you through a very simple mindfulness practice that is designed to help with transition. So the first thing we're going to do is simply take a couple of deep breaths and bring our attention to ourselves. So go ahead, take a couple of breaths. And then I invite you to just think about relaxing your mind and your body. So continue to breathe and just let your body and mind relax. And even open, imagine openness. And from this place of relaxation and openness, we're going to feel what our emotions are doing. So what emotions are you having? And then just notice where in your body you might be feeling those emotions, if there is a place. Some people have tension or tightness or kind of a clenching feeling or anything else. Just noticing. And now that you've sort of taken a minute to tap into your emotions, notice what your thoughts are doing. What are you thinking about? Sometimes when we get to our emotions, then we want to judge ourselves for having them or talk ourselves out of them instead of simply accepting them for what they are. So watching thoughts is the next step. And then the final step is to simply allow what is. And this is about letting go of expectations. So having no attachment to an outcome or a sense that things have to be in a certain way. But just breathing in that a feeling of allowing. And then I invite you to take one or two final breaths, and we'll set that practice aside. So while you're taking the final breaths, the 5 steps are to take some deep breaths, relax your body and mind, feel your emotions, watch your thoughts, and allow what is. Really a great mindfulness practice for most things, but really helpful in the time of transition. All right, so here is Susan Bridges works with William, and they've been working together for many years, but I like her quote about the neutral zone. The essence of life takes place in the neutral zone phase of transition. It is in that interim spaciousness that all possibilities, creativity, and innovative ideas can come to life and flourish. So that's really the bonus of this unknown place, is that something new can often emerge, something better than what we imagined. So I'm going to set up this poll, and then I'm going to let Molly run it for me. So what I would like for you to do is to weigh in. What actions are you going to take to help you navigate the neutral zone? And there are 4 choices. Find treasures, decide what to keep and throw, sit with emotions, or become curious. So go ahead and put your vote in when you're ready.
Thanks, Theresa. And we'll give people just a few more moments here to respond to the question, and then I will share the summary of results. So it looks like most people have responded, and the top answer was decide what to keep and what to throw, with 37%. The second greatest response was to sit with emotions with 25%. A close third was to become curious at 22%. And then the final response at 16% was to find treasures.
Great. Thanks, Molly. Fun to see a little mix of everything. Yeah. Seems like the big one, decide what to keep and throw, which is something that I think is important because we don't often have enough time during our daily busy routine to actually have the time to reflect on that. So great. So as I mentioned, there is a third phase, and this is really when the new normal appears. We move into new beginnings. And the work in this place is to assemble a new identity based on your values, attitudes, and understandings. So this is a place where having the time in the neutral zone to really reflect on who you are, what really matters to you, what you believe, what you value, etc., really feeds well into redefining yourself when you get to this place of a new normal. So it can be really helpful to have that. Otherwise, what tends to happen, and I imagine some of you can relate to this, you carry baggage from the past that doesn't really serve you, and it can be even harder to sort of reconfigure your identity when you're carrying stuff that's not really helpful in the new normal that you're part of. The second thing is to move with purpose toward what is emerging. I think this is so powerful in that it allows us to go from a place of feeling out of control to really, okay, there is something new I can do. I can reconfigure my identity in a way that helps me move forward in a meaningful way. And along those lines, you contribute to the change and redefine your roles. So this is really the place where you decide how you're going to show up and what your life is going to be about moving forward. And the biggest way to do that is to embrace the new normal and stay open. I think one of the things we can tend to do when we get to the new normal is we want to just have the answer and then get along like we just know exactly what the days and weeks are about. But instead, if we can stay open, it's like take what you know right now and also be curious, because there will be ongoing changes that we need to respond to. It's never a one and done process in transition or change. And so it's really helpful to keep an open, curious mindset. So I'm going to pause and just see if there are questions.
So, Teresa, one of the first questions was, When you were talking about letting go, are we keeping and throwing away physical items or emotions or emotional attachments?
Oh, great question. Thanks, Mary Jo. Yeah, I think it's a little of all of those. So that's such a great question. Sometimes it is physical items. I think for some people, I'm thinking of women I've worked with who have had 3 children and they still want to hang on to something that maybe will never fit them the rest of their lives. So sometimes it is a physical item. But I also think sometimes it is just an emotional, maybe it's a mindset we hold or expectation we hold of ourselves that's no longer realistic. So it can really be a wide variety of things. So that's a great question.
So another participant writes, Teresa, part of why I'm struggling with letting go is I keep thinking that things will return back to normal. Do you think that there is an old normal, or are we going to have to adjust to a new reality post-pandemic?
Oh, that feels like the $1,000,000 question. Oh, that's such a great question. And I think for one thing, I want to just pause and say, I think that's so true for so many people, sort of this feeling of, since we have no idea what the new normal is going to be, why not hang on to us getting back to where we were? And I don't think any of us actually knows what that future looks like. And at the same time, I will say, I feel like it's changing already in small ways. I see people adapting in ways that they maybe are not even aware of, like parents figuring out how to work from home and help their children with school and do things in ways that have changed and strengthened relationships that even when the quote new normal appears, those changes will probably have shifted the trajectory of things indefinitely. So I don't have a good answer for this question because I certainly don't really know what the new normal will look like. And I don't know that we have a sense how much will be the same and how much might change as a result of what we're going through.
So another person writes, how do you embrace what is emerging when that changes frequently as well?
Yeah, great question. Such a good question. That is so true. So I think it's about, if we think about what we have control over, which many of you wrote early on is the thing you struggle with the most when you're letting go, all we can do is pay attention to what we have in the moment, right? Like, this is what's emerging. Let me pay attention and be responsive here, but it may change. And I think that's why the theory around staying open and sort of responsive is so critical, because if we latch on to maybe something that happens in the first 5 minutes of the new beginning, when 15 to 20 minutes later something new emerges, then we have a harder time keeping up with the emerging new normal that sort of takes time to reveal itself.
Thanks for that, Teresa. So is distraction a part of apathy? I find myself doing all sorts of tasks other than looking for a job to replace what I've lost. I'm having a hard time motivating myself to the job search.
Yeah. Oh, first of all, I'm deeply sorry. And I know that's the reality for many people. So to pause and say, yes, distraction is a very normal response to apathy. And also, I will say there is a lot going on that I just want to pause and say the research is showing that underlying a lot of this is grief. So, for people who are at all concerned that maybe their response is a little more than normal, just pay attention, because I think this sort of global grief that we're all experiencing has a certain weight to it. And so we have to be mindful of our mental well-being. And so absolutely, apathy and distraction are part of the same thing. And also, if you feel like it's lasting a long time and you're just not able to move forward, I hope you're able to get some mental health support as well.
And so somebody else writes, how do you handle prolonged periods of the neutral zone and
Oh,
apathy?
yeah, good. That's the hardest part, isn't it? So I think a few things. I think back to the finding treasures, finding meaning in the middle of not knowing is probably the thing we are least comfortable doing in the West. And I say that just because I'm a good United States gal, but we're very focused in our culture on moving forward, on getting somewhere, on being productive. And so I think it is challenging for us to sit and reflect and wait until we know how to move forward, or wait until something comes toward us that we can respond to. So I think it's the ability to sit with the emotions and etc., deal with the uncertainty, and to trust the process, which is not always easy because it can feel like, hurry up, I just want to get through this. And Dr. Davidson talks about people who try to skirt through the hallway or move too quickly through that phase of the neutral zone can tend to have things come out sideways when the new normal appears. And so there's not a great answer. And I think we don't give enough weight to, or time for, or understanding of people really navigating that neutral zone, because if you don't, it can come with some pretty significant side effects at a later date or time.
Mm. So this person writes, do you have any suggestions for navigating change as we prepare to welcome our first child in these unusual times?
Wow. Well, first of all, congratulations. And second, wow, what a time to be doing that. So I think, I feel like my answer to you is you have a larger welcoming. There's always something going on in the world, but what a time to be welcoming a child. And so I think one of the things I would say to you is, what is it you need as the people welcoming this child? And what is it you want to create for this child as they come into this world? So there is really an opportunity, in my estimation, to consciously choose how we show up, and to also consciously choose how we present the world to others, even when there's a lot of uncertainty. Those messages we tell ourselves, the practices we use to tell our nervous system that we are okay despite what life hands us, all of that is really useful during this time. So good luck with that.
Can you talk a little bit more about creating new identity? What is the balance between new identity and staying grounded in what is unchanging about us?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think when I think about new identity, I think for all of us, there is a core part of us that's probably fairly unchanging. And that's not what's up for question, I think, is how I would answer that. And what I would say in response to it is also then, it's that ability to respond to what's emerging. So if you were a married couple who's now having a child, what happens when you now have to consider that child in all of your decisions? How do you behave differently? So what are the new beliefs, expectations you should have about your day? Just knowing my siblings and their world after having children, it's kind of like suddenly um, getting ready for work is no longer a 30-minute process, right? So it can be the smallest and the biggest things. So I think identity doesn't mean you're throwing away anything, but it means you're being open and responsive to what's emerging. The expectations, values, beliefs, etc., are usually what shifts during that time.
This next question, Theresa, I can really relate to. This is a very non-linear experience for me. My ship seems to be racing back and forth between all of these zones. Some days I feel like I'm in and out of all the zones from day to day. Is that normal?
Yeah, such a great question. And I thank you, Mary Jo. I feel like it's true for me as well. I think, yes, I think I should have said, and I apologize for not, but I'll catch it here. It's not linear, though we wish it were. It's roughly linear in that that's roughly what happens. But I think what we're dealing with, it's sort of like complex grief in my mind. There are multiple changes happening at a large system level to our city, our community, our larger world. And so we just might start moving towards something, and then we completely have to shift, and we might end up back at the beginning or somewhere in between. I don't know that it's a moving easily from one step to the next, but it might be more important to simply, when you find yourself at one point, in the equation, so whether that's letting go, the neutral zone, or the new beginning, depending on the day, to be mindful and choose some practices that support you when you're navigating that place.
Mm. This is kind of a different twist of a question, Theresa. What do you do when others don't want you to change and go through transition and transform?
Yeah. Oh, great question. And that is, I mean, some people are very challenged by our transition, aren't they? Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are some things I can recommend that are helpful. And one is communication. Even if people don't want to change or don't want you to change, excuse me, I think one of the things that I see people doing that does not help when they're in transition is they just, if people don't want them to change, they just sort of cut them out or don't communicate, don't share how they're feeling or what they're needing. And so often, what I've learned in coaching people is that when we're going through transition, people are afraid they're going to be left behind. And so, if we can engage them and help them understand what we're moving toward and what part they can play and that they still matter to us, that can all help with that transition process for both parties involved.
Mm. So this next question, Theresa, relates to managing transitions in response to trauma. And the question is, are there some aspects of these tips that you have that are most helpful in trauma situations, assuming that professional help is already being sought?
Yeah, good. Okay, great. Thanks, Mary Jo. Yeah, I think it is, first of all, I just appreciate this person saying, as long as professional help is involved, because I think when there is trauma, trying to navigate it alone can be very challenging and can be actually very harmful. So I appreciate that as a first step. I think the challenging thing and the important thing is to pay attention to your expectations of yourself a lot when you're navigating transition as a person dealing with trauma, and to give yourself, it's not even one of the steps, but it's part of the neutral zone in a very subtle way. And I think it's especially important in trauma. Give yourself breaks. Like we talked about earlier, distractions, and you don't want to be distracted all the time, but sometimes you can't be doing the transition work 24/7 and you can't be healing from your trauma 24/7. So if you need to go on Netflix and watch it for an hour or do something to distract yourself, there are healthy uses of distraction, and any good counselor would tell you that. It's how much and when. So I think some of that, and I would say the last thing about trauma is some of the mindfulness and giving yourself a lot of time with your thoughts might be challenging, and so that might be something you would avoid. But perhaps doing something like walking in nature or doing something else that allows your nervous system to calm without having a lot of time for your thoughts might be a better way to do some of the neutral zone work. So I can offer those just off the top of my head.
So that was a question about trauma. The next question is about profound grief and loss. This person writes, I lost my husband very suddenly 2.5 years ago, and everything about this has been overwhelmingly negative, maintaining the house, liquidating and selling off his business, loneliness, and much more. It was unexpected, and we had not prepared for this situation. How can a person overcome a loss this severe?
Yeah. Oh, first of all, my deepest sympathies. That sounds like it was really, really challenging for you. So I think, first of all, it seems like just based on your question that you are doing the first step, which is saying how challenging it is and how big it is. And there was shock involved, which makes it even more challenging. So many things. And I can hear also in your question the sort of, there's so much to do. It sounds like there's just so much to do, and you're left sort of doing it all on your own because there wasn't preparation. So my advice or my thoughts, and this is what can often not go well during transition, is we can withdraw from our support system. We get concerned about asking for the help we need. We're worried about, burdening others. We want to, get it all right and move quickly through it. And we all are on our own timetable. So again, I feel like managing expectations, getting support, getting if there's mental health needed, to have someone to really talk to that can really hold that kind of grief with good skills and practices to support you, etc. So that's what I would offer for you.
Yeah, I think, Teresa, going along with that, oftentimes, even when it's this long past a loss, sometimes joining a grief and loss group can also be something that's very helpful. I'm going to move into the final question, Teresa, and this person asks, can you repeat the 5 practices? So that seems like it would be a good way to summarize the webinar.
Perfect. So I'm assuming this is the 5-step mindfulness practice for navigating in the neutral zone.
Exactly.
Is that the one, Mary Jo? Okay, great. So here it is. Thanks for asking. So step 1 is take some deep breaths. Step 2 is relax mentally and physically and stay open. Step 3 is to feel your emotions. Step 4 is to watch your thoughts. And step 5 is to allow what is.
Well, thank you very much, Teresa. Molly, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and for sticking with us due to the audio issues. We will be sending out a post-webinar email, as I shared. It will have a recording of today's webinar, Teresa's PowerPoint, so you can take a look at some of those steps again, and also some other resources that we have on navigating transition and change. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you on a future webinar.